welcome to the Fantasy Football Universe. My name is Jeremy Shulman at FF_Rebel. I am joined today by Jesse Moeller at JMoeller05. Today, we are talking about free agents, running through each position, and we are discussing quarterback free agents. Where could they land, what to expect, and how it might shake up the market. Jesse, how are you doing today?
I am doing good. Excited to talk about, as we see our buddy Kirk Cousin, my Mr. Kirk O'Chain's on the screen. Excited to talk about all the quarterbacks and the moving parts because we're still early enough in the offseason where we don't have the places for them. So it's a pretty intriguing spot to be. So yeah, I'm pretty excited to jump in and talk about it.
Awesome. This particular article covers the top 10 quarterbacks. You can find this at the fantasyfootballuniverse.com. We've also posted a bunch of it on Twitter, and you're going to be able to find this and all of the free agents, top 10 at each position, including IDP, at the Fantasy Football Universe. So check that out if you want to read more. This particular article was written by Aaron. But we'll take a look at Kirk Cousins first. Of course, coming from the Minnesota Vikings, now a free agent. There's some speculation he could go back to Minnesota. There's a lot of talk about him searching for homes and schools and talking to Kyle Pitts about his number in Atlanta. So we're not totally sure what the tea leaves are saying. But before we get into that, let's just take a look at his contract and market value. So his 2023 contract AAV is $35 million. And his 24 market value, 3 years for $118 million. I don't know if an aging veteran quarterback as good as Kirk Cousins has been the last few years is going to command that kind of salary, but there are some very QB needy teams out there. So I guess we'll see. In terms of the write-up, right? Obviously, going back to Minnesota is certainly the best bet for the Vikings. But, who knows? Minnesota, Atlanta, Denver, Washington, who knows what could happen here. Jesse, what are you thinking in terms of landing spots for Kirk Cousins and how's it all going to shake out in your mind?
I'm interested to see what Cousins, because last year we had a report come out that the Vikings desperately try to trade up into the top 4 to get one of the quarterbacks. And the same cycle reported happening this year again. So I'm pretty certain at this point that they're going to move on from Cousins. He is 36 years old. He's coming off the Achilles injury, which sucks because if he was not coming off the Achilles injury, he'd be by far the top quarterback option. It's not even close because he's the one quarterback who you can put in and he could be the focal point of the offense and he could run a positive offense. Like, I think he's been top 10 in EPA per dropback for like the past 6 years. Like, he's been a very good underrated quarterback. And he's the one guy in this class where you're like, all right, this guy we can be competitive with. The other guys, there's question marks and all those things. It's just he's 36 years old and he has the massive Achilles. His last contract was completely guaranteed. Like, it was a fully guaranteed contract, which kind of set us in that direction with quarterback contracts and all that. So I'm intrigued. But I think Atlanta is really interesting. Pittsburgh is very interesting as well because they have this skill set of players that would match with Cousins where it wouldn't be a huge drop off offensively to go from the Minnesota scheme and the talent to go to, say, like Atlanta with all those skilled players and Pittsburgh, even though it's been a disaster of a quarterback situation there. You get Cousins there, that offense looks entirely different. So those are the two kind of landing spots I want. I guess there's a place like you talked about, Washington. He could go to Denver, but like I'm not really excited to see him in Denver particularly. And the wild card maybe is the Raiders. Like the Raiders would be the other team because they're looking for a quarterback too, right? And they're kind of on that outside looking in. So I think one of those spots would be very interesting. What's your kind of the spot you're hoping to see him go, and then where do you think he goes?
Yeah, I mean, look, here's the thing, right? Like you said, as an aging quarterback, he's coming off that injury. It's not like Minnesota was a phenomenal offensive line, but I'd love to see Kirk Cousins go somewhere where he's going to have time, right? The weapons in Minnesota, I think, and the scheme there helped him a little bit more. He's someone who can get the ball out quick anyway. So it's like a Tom Brady sort of situation where, he's getting the ball out quick so that he doesn't need the line to be elite. At the same time, a team like the Raiders has probably a better line than most of these other teams that we're looking at in terms of Atlanta. If you think about Ritter and how he was running around last year, he wasn't a good quarterback, but he didn't have the time either. Washington, no thank you. So there's a lot of situations where maybe, at this point in his career, I think he's probably going to look for some security, also looking to win a title, right? So I kind of hope he goes somewhere where, he's got some weapons and he's got some time. So for me, it's the Raiders, but Atlanta is just so intriguing with those weapons, and Minnesota is really nice. I think he goes back to Minnesota, though. I think it's just going to be too intriguing. He doesn't need to uproot his family. He's pretty entrenched there. If you watch that quarterback series on, I
Hmm.
don't know if it's Netflix or whatever, I mean, you got your insight into Kirk Cousins, which is, he's kind of a lunch pail guy, pretty simple and straightforward. And going somewhere like Atlanta, where he has to get used to a new coach, and a new scheme, and new players, I don't know for fantasy if that's going to be, and reality, if that's going to be something that he's looking to do at this stage. But in terms of Atlanta and Minnesota, I think they probably have the same chances of making the playoffs and potentially making a run. So we'll see how it shakes out. But yeah, if I was a betting man, I'd say he goes back to Minnesota.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think the most intriguing one to me is Atlanta because you're bringing in Zach Robinson. They're getting rid of the Arthur Smith stank. He's
Mhm.
from the Sean McVay coaching staff. So like you're bringing that player in. You giving these talented elite skill position players. You have Bijan, you have Kyle Pitts, you have Drake London. Like that's a nucleus with a player Kirk Cousins who is about as good as it gets at supporting fantasy assets. So from a fantasy perspective, I think he's the one guy that goes in and wherever he goes, those guys are going to get a value raise. So like say if it's Minnesota, Atlanta, any one of these places, like those skill position players get a bump because of how good Kirk Cousins is. So like overall, I'm pretty interested. And I thought that the Netflix thing was funny because he was like, he didn't even pick out his own clothes. Like that was the most surprising thing to me. He's like, no, I gotta focus on football. Leave it to my wife. And he got the whole dad vibes with like the Coles cash and everything. So I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah. And I think the one benefit here too is that Atlanta has pick number 8 overall, so they could go out and get an elite tackle, right?
Mhm.
If they take Cousins, they could also go out and get like a Dunze,
Oh,
right? If he's there, they could go out and get a big name piece on this offense because their defense is in decent shape, right? We saw that last year, so it's just kind of a matter of how they're going to play it. But yeah, we'll see if he goes to Atlanta, stays in Minnesota, or goes somewhere else. And now we're on Isaiah Williams because that's interesting.
I know. I was wondering where we were going. And I was like,
There
well,
we go.
I guess Isaiah Williams is number 2.
We're going to Baker. We're going to Baker Mayfield. Last year in Tampa Bay kind of resurrected his career from both a reality and a fantasy standpoint. You see his market values down here. And in terms of Aaron, and I think a lot of other people in the industry believe that Baker is coming back to Tampa, especially with the re-signing of Mike Evans there. So what are your thoughts on Baker Mayfield? What should he do? Where might he go? Where do you think he ends up?
Yeah, I think it's like that's the most logical scenario because Mike Evans said part of the reason why he's re-signed in Tampa Bay is because they promised they're going to get him a veteran quarterback.
Yes.
So, like, I mean, who knows? Maybe they bring in Kirk Cousins and that just
There you
throws everything
go.
out for a wrench, right? But Baker finally was healthy last year. It was the first time in a few years he's been healthy, and he looked more like rookie Baker Mayfield. What we've seen, he was top 10 in EPA drop back. He actually was the competent quarterback. Like the offense was humming. He was doing things down the field, and we saw Mike Evans like come back to life because of Baker Mayfield being there. So overall, I think he is a guy that can make you a borderline playoff team in the right situation. He's good enough. He's better than some of these we get down on the list when it gets like the Tyrod and Brissett's and those guys. He's like a tier above those guys. He's kind of that middle ground where it's Geno Smith. Like you're not 100% confident, like you're going to compete, but you don't know if you're going to be too bad. So if you have a roster like Tampa Bay does, they're kind of on the Saints track where they're like, you know what, we're just going to keep competing and keep going for it. I think Baker Mayfield's the guy for you. So you bring him in, he's going to be significantly cheaper than Cousins just because he doesn't have the track record in history. And all this is like the character concerns that people had about Baker. Like that seemed to be falling off, but it's still there with him. So I think he'll come in slightly cheaper and you'll get a competent quarterback. And teams don't want to lose there and like tank for the first pick because the GM's goal is to keep his job. And if you re-sign Baker Mayfield, he helps you keep your job. So overall, I think him to Tampa Bay makes the most sense personally.
Yeah, that's it. And keep selling tickets, right? I mean,
Yeah,
keep
100%.
that cash flow coming in. Yeah, I think Baker back to Tampa is probably as more certain than Kirk back to Minnesota, right? This
Yes.
one seems like a no brainer for everyone involved. For Baker, he resurrected his career. Why leave a situation where you have a an perennial all pro wide receiver, and then potentially Chris Godwin or whoever else ends up coming in. Trey Palmer looked great last year. Kate Otten is no slouch. from a reality perspective. And Baker Mayfield is one of the premier check down quarterbacks in the league, for better or worse, right? So we like it for all the weapons there in Tampa Bay, Rashad White included, even if they bring somebody else in. If he goes somewhere else, I mean, I don't know. I've heard maybe New England thrown around. We talked about the other landing spots, the Denver, the Raiders. None of them are nearly as appealing as Tampa. And Tampa made a little run in the playoffs last year. They almost took down the Detroit Lions as well. So, they were an impressive team, even though, they're kind of jettisoning some of their defensive side of the ball guys. They're getting older on that side. So we'll see if they can keep that up and keep competitive. But yeah, I agree with you. Tampa Bay is probably where Baker ends up.
I will put in the caveat, like losing Dave Canales is probably a pretty big deal for him. So like that's the one thing with Baker, like you're not like we haven't seen it for a long time with him, right? And Dave Canales resurrected Geno. He comes in, resurrects Baker. So you're wondering, without him moving to Carolina, like can Baker be the guy he was last year? I don't know, but he was really good last year. So I mean, we have something to move on, and I think Tampa just makes the most sense.
Yeah, and I hear you on the Dave Canales thing, but I think it also has something to do with Mike Evans over there as well.
Chris Godwin,
just a little bit. In terms of Gardner Minshew, I mean, he's an interesting guy. But to be honest, if he's starting for an NFL franchise at this point, no, thank you. Joe Flacco, we'll see if he even comes back. Tannehill is interesting. I don't want to spend too much time on him. But if we consider kind of a one-year deal for Tannehill, even as kind of a bridge guy to help support, as Tannehill loves to do, as we know, to help support one of these rookies like a Drake May, or even a Jaden Daniels, JJ McCarthy. Do you think that Tannehill could end up starting somewhere? And if so, where?
I think he's so we just talked about Gardner. Like I view them similarly. Like they're both bridge quarterbacks. Gardner was a Pro Bowler last year, so pump the brakes on that, my friend. Hold on, you know what I'm saying? No, I think they're kind of similar. Like both these guys, like if I was a team and I drafted a rookie, say I drafted JJ McCarthy, these are the guys I'm going to do where you learn behind a professional quarterback. Like Tannehill's skills have regressed. Gardner Minshew's kind of the guy he's always been. He just doesn't have the elite arm talent. It is what it is. So you put him behind these guys. You let him develop as a quarterback. They do the year. You see how it goes because you still want the skill position players to develop. And if you have a rookie quarterback that cannot develop those guys, it's a wasted season, right? So if you're unsure with a rookie quarterback, you pair these guys in and, you see how it goes. So I think wherever that team drafts that rookie like JJ McCarthy or, maybe it's Penix or Bo Nix or whoever it is, they bring in the veteran and he's like, all right, you have this year, do your thing, take over, and then we'll let them come in after that. So I think they're interesting from that perspective. Like they're going to come in really cheap, as you can see on the market value. It's probably $5 million, give or take.
Yeah.
And you just go with it. So overall, I don't mind them for fantasy. It's just kind of super flex only, and you're hoping they get a job. But outside of that, it's just, we'll see where it goes. I really don't know where they're going to go because it feels like they could go anywhere, to tell you the truth.
Yeah. And what other team could use a veteran presence in their quarterback room? The Tennessee Titans. I'm not sure that Will Levis is actually the guy. So if Ryan Tannehill is leaving, we need to get somebody in there like maybe this guy, Josh Dobbs. We'll see. Not too excited about him. We'll talk about him in a second. Maybe not Tyler Huntley. Maybe this guy, Jacoby Brissett, if he doesn't end up back with my Patriots. And then number 10, rounding it out, who I also love, Tyrod Taylor. But whether he stays in New York, we know he's not going back to Los Angeles, most likely. So we'll see where he ends up. He's a little intriguing to me. But I think to round this all off, we have to talk about number 7. Aaron's pretty down on Russ. But of course, I think that might have to do with the market value. Nobody needs to pay him because the Denver Broncos are funding the rest of Russell Wilson's life. They're eating $85 million. That's right, $85 million in dead cap. And I just had it up. But Jesse Palmer of the NFL Network, I wish I could find it, but it's gone on my feed. Jesse Palmer of the NFL Network kind of outlined it in one of two ways. The Denver Broncos actually have a choice. They can split it up between 53 mil and 35 mil or whatever the remainder is, or go for only 41 mil this year. So, it's 85 mil over the course of 2 years, and however you slice it, they are in deep doo-doo. They are looking at what the Saints should have been looking at all along. But forget that. Denver's going to be terrible this year and potentially for a lot more years to come. But Jesse, where do you think Russell Wilson ends up? Is there smoke is there fire, I guess, to the smoke of Russ to Pitt? We've heard the New York Giants today as potential suitors. Where does he end up, and where should he end up?
Yeah, like it's so interesting with Russ because if you watch last year, I know the numbers, like they look nice, his touchdown to interception ratio. A lot of that stuff was like there were full quarters, like you had nothing on offense. Like he was literally like incapable of being an NFL quarterback. So he would come alive late in the, like when they're down by 2 touchdowns, he'd come back and drive for a touchdown, like because defenses are playing off, they're not doing anything. So he got a little boost with how the team worked out. But if you watched him play last year, it was rough. And maybe that was Sean Payton trying to tank him to get the injury value and all of that stuff, because you could see there was definitely friction in that. So it was a very weird year. I think, like we talk about Pittsburgh because they are so quarterback dependent, because I know they said they're not interested in quarterbacks. I call complete BS on that. There's no way you're going to roll out the Mason Rudolph and, Duck Hodges and all these guys, right? And Kenny Pickett, who is a truly horrendous quarterback. You can't do that with the skill position players you have. You have to bring in someone to at least give yourself some hope. And as bad as Russ was last year, he's still better than those guys. So he's going to basically be free because, like you talked about, what Denver's doing is they have 2 options, similar to what the teams did with like Jamal Adams with the Seahawks. You can take the cap hit this year, or you can spread it out. It just really just depends how you want to go about it. Some teams, like with Michael Thomas, they'll take the cap hit this year or spread it out 2 years, same thing. So with the Ruster situation, it's kind of like a gift of someone like, hey, you can, sign him for $1 million. They'll pay the whole rest of it. And you get a quarterback who we've seen the highs the last couple of years. It's obviously fallen off, but there's something there with him. So I don't mind it for Pittsburgh really to at least take a gamble on him. But like I would hope they would bring someone else in to compete with Russ, because you don't just want to fully depend on Russ at this point in his career. Outside of that, it's really getting a little dicey, right? So I think Pittsburgh's the one that makes the most sense because of how stubborn they are with these quarterbacks and how they treat that room. So at least it's, it gives Pickens and those guys hope. And that's, we're fantasy managers. We live for that hope, right? Yeah. So if that happens, it'll be interesting at least.
And for fantasy, I can't think of a better place for him to go, to be honest, where he's going to be valued. I mean, Atlanta, of course, right? Like whoever ends up in Atlanta, if it's a vet who can throw the ball, they're going to be miles, light years more advanced than whatever offense they were rolling out last year with the combination of Heineke and Ritter and, Arthur Smith. So, Atlanta would be a good fit, but Pittsburgh is probably the best for his fantasy value. And in terms of fantasy, once Russell Wilson lands, I'm looking to unload him for whatever I can. I'm going to go full Sean Payton on him and just like, listen, dude, you're sitting on my bench until I can get you off this team as fast as possible. So, I'm hoping for Pittsburgh. Sounds good. Atlanta would be great just to get rid of him. But yeah, he's a dying asset. And at this point, in Superflex, do you think you can get a second for him if he lands in one of those 2 spots?
I mean, if he's starting, I think you can get a second just because, how we prop up that position. I just saw that he did in the last hour he met with the Giants. So if he goes to the Giants, like the lack of skill position players there really just, it makes you wonder what they're doing in New York. Like just get a quarterback, go get a quarterback. So that would be like the worst case scenario on the flip side. So Pittsburgh be good. Yeah. Like I don't want him in like New York. I think it's just like that's an awful situation.
New York shouldn't want him in New York just because of like, you really think Russell Wilson at this advanced stage is better than Daniel Jones? I'm not trying to like blow smoke up Daniel Jones as here. He struggles, as a quarterback, but he's at about on par with Russell Wilson, and there's nothing to work with beyond a over the hill Darren Waller. So let's add an over the hill Russell Wilson to the pile. Why not?
Yeah, I think he needs to show like more of the skill of what he's shown previously in the past few years, because last year it's an abomination for quarterback stuff. Like you watch it and you're like, the middle of the field was completely just void. There was nothing going on in the middle of the field. And maybe this is part of, Russ's issue that he's kind of had his whole career, where he kind of avoids the middle of the field, which he's done the past 5 years. So he really needs to fix that. I mean, they have a million slot wide receivers. You think it would work paired together, like they would live in the middle of the field? Yeah. We'll see if that works. I don't know. But like, we get back to the point of the GM needs to keep his job. So what do? You sign a veteran Russell Wilson. So I could see him ending up in New York. Personally, I don't want it to happen.
Yeah. Russell Wilson in New York, and they trade for Jerry Jeudy. That would just be the worst totally New York Giants move that you could possibly imagine. Good Lord. Let's just hope for fantasy. I think in my Twitter bio, it still says Jerry Jeudy apologist. So
no, you might need to work on that one there.
Well, we'll see. I got maybe a little hope in this final year, but it is what it is. Russell Wilson's gone for sure. Kirk Cousins and Baker Mayfield may be back. We'll find out when it all shakes out in about a week and a half here. But for right now, this has been Jeremy. That has been Jesse. And this has been Russell Wilson, Mr. Deadcap himself. For this article, make sure you go to Fantasy Football Universe to check it out, as well as the top 10 free agents at all positions. And we will see you next time. Have a good one.